And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It's Friday, April 5th, 2024. Glad to have you along. Thank you for being here on another episode of the pod. I'm your host, Max Torres. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're tuned in to today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. If you are here on YouTube at Oregon Football Max Torres, leave me a comment. Let me know what you're thinking about Oregon football right now. You can talk about the search for a new running backs coach. You can talk about recruiting. You can talk about spring practice. All of those topics are up for grabs. And if you want to ask a question for the chance to be featured on a future mailbag episode, or a mailbag question, rather, to be featured on a future episode of the pod, go ahead and leave that in the comments, or you can DM me on Twitter at mtorresports, and I'll do my best to get to it. But yeah, Friday, we have a nice little weekend on tap. I'm going to be taking a camping trip with my girlfriend and some of my good friends. So looking forward to that. And I went to a Giants game earlier this week, Giants Dodgers. They did get swept, but I'm still here. I'm still repping. I'm no fair weather fan, but it's been a fun week. It's been a fun week also because the Ducks resumed spring practice, and we got to hear from a couple of coaches and players. So on today's episode, we're going to be primarily focusing on some of those updates, defensive updates that we got. We got to hear from co-defensive coordinator and defensive backs coach Chris Hampton, also Justin Jacobs, a veteran linebacker for the Ducks, Tez Johnson, one of the Ducks' best wide receivers. So I got some notes typed up here, and we're just going to get into some of that and talk about some takeaways from the latest Oregon football news as the Ducks held their fourth of 15 spring practices in Eugene at the Hatfield Dowling Complex on Thursday. Going to start off with one of the big focuses of the spring for the Ducks have been some new faces in that secondary, primarily Cam Alexander, Jabbar Muhammad, and Kobe Savage, who all joined the Ducks from the transfer portal. And Chris Hampton was asked just about how different is your secondary with these three new transfers. And Hampton said, quote, "It's a blessing and a fortunate situation for us, really. All guys have played at a high level. They've played a lot of football, so you've got a lot of experience. It's just different for them now, learning our terminology and our system. But it's really a fortunate situation for me. I've got guys who've played a lot of football. It's been a challenge. It's just got to I've just got to translate some things because football is the same, just different terminology depending on the team you play for. Making sure they understand what we call things here compared to what they call it at the other places has been the challenging part. And I think that's one of the best parts for Oregon secondary as you look to 2024 and to their first season in the Big Ten. I think they have put a really conscious effort into revamping, and I don't know if I'd say overhauling, but certainly reloading this secondary with some of those guys that I mentioned, because you're not turning to necessarily, at least I don't think it's the expectation that you're turning to some young players that haven't played a lot of football. No, you have the luxury, because you're Oregon and one of the better teams in the sport, to turn to the transfer portal and bring in some guys that are already proven. Jabbar Muhammad was a thorn in Oregon's side last year, and just about every other team that he played at the cornerback spot, because he's really, really good in coverage and he's just a special talent. So Oregon has a great situation because they're able to turn to some of these guys who have played a lot of football and they know what they're doing. Now it's just a matter of getting them comfortable in that system, getting them in the playbook, and bonding with their teammates. So I think that's a great thing for the Ducks. Another thing that was interesting when we got to hear from Chris Hampton was this is the first time we got to hear from him since he earned the promotion from co-defensive coordinator and safeties coach to overall defensive backs coach. And I think a lot of people would look at that on the surface and say, wow, that is a lot of responsibility. But I think Oregon's in a favorable position here with him taking on some of these new responsibilities, because he was asked about what's your background coaching the entire DB room. And he said, quote, honestly, I've kind of always done that. When I was at McNeese State, I coached all 5 DBs. That was 2012 to 2015. When I was at Tulane from 2018 to 2019, I had all the DBs. And actually, when I was the DC at Tulane, I had the entire secondary. I had some guys who worked with me, but we had one DB meeting and I was the defensive coordinator. So I've done it before. This wasn't the first time. A lot of people do it this way. So I think that was really interesting to hear, because having everybody on the same page is not necessarily something that Oregon has always had, right? I think that's been something that has been a challenge at times, to get everybody on the same page. And the communication that comes with that is something that's super crucial. And I think that that's going to help them when it comes to just communication and kind of knowing where everyone's supposed to be at next season. And when he talked about how this wasn't the first time he's coached all 5 defensive backs, I think that's another reason that you have to be confident, because you have a guy who's done it before. And he has, I think, quietly been one of the more valuable pieces of this coaching staff when you look at the jump that Oregon was able to take from a defensive standpoint from 2022 to 2023. And that's why the spring's fun, because you get to hear things from coaches and players that maybe you don't think are going to have a lot of impact in that present moment, but maybe we find ourselves in the thick of the season in late October, early November, and we were having these conversations of, oh, hey, do you remember when that was said, or this was said, or that was said back in the spring? I think we're seeing some of that pop up now. So a big part of what Oregon's going to be able to do in the secondary next year isn't just with Chris Hampton. There's another big coach in the building that has been kind of steadily building a reputation and I think proving his worth, and that's Rashad Wadood, who's going to be doing a lot of work with the cornerbacks this year. And Hampton was asked on Thursday, just tell us a little bit about your relationship with Rashad Wadood, because this isn't a guy that's gotten to talk to the media. We see him. I'll see him running around practice when I'm out there in Eugene later this month. But we got to hear from Hampton about Rashad Wadood and the relationship he has with them. He said, quote, it's great. We have a great relationship. He and I get together a lot to decide what we're going to do during the individual portion of practice, right? There's times like today where the first part of practice, I was with the safeties, and then I went with him during the second part with the corners. He and I get together and collaborate on what we're going to do during individual. He's watching the corners specifically. He does a lot of correction meetings with them. I do a lot of the install meetings. That's kind of how we do it. I let him do a lot of the correction tape, and I do the installations. We just bounce ideas off of each other. He's done a really good job with them. He's been in the system. I think this is his 3rd year now. He understands what we're doing. So that was just kind of cool to hear a little bit more about their relationship and what that coaching dynamic is like on the field. The fact that Hampton's able to kind of focus on the safeties a bit more when he needs to, but he's also confident that Wadood knows what he's doing. Talking about how this is his 3rd year in the system, I think that kind of underscores something that is very relevant right now in terms of just bringing in up and coming, rising young head coaches. And then you can teach them, develop them, coach them up when it comes to becoming a great coach. What's worked for you? What's the culture like? All those things. And because Wadood's been in the system for 3 years now, like Hampton said, he knows what the expectation is. He knows what Lanny wants out of the corners and what it takes to really make this thing go. And he's been around the roster and knows the strengths of a lot of these guys. So I think that that's a really interesting point to look at when you just consider the overall vision of building a program and having some young coaches that come and go, or you have older, more experienced coaches that move on, much like Demetrius Martin did this offseason, right? He chose to go back to Michigan State to join Jonathan Smith's staff. So I think that the corners are one of the groups that I'm the most excited about this year. And I think it's going to be really fun to see what they have to say. We got a comment here from Andrew. Thanks for the comment, Andrew. He is a frequent listener and viewer of the show. Andrew says, I'm really curious to see how the DB play looks solely under Hampton. As much as Coach Martin was a stellar recruiter, I just never felt like he was the developer he needed to be. Yeah, I can kind of see where this one's coming from because he was the Pac-12 Recruiter of the Year in the 2023 class. I think that was from 247 Sports. Um, and he brought some really good talent in. And then he obviously developed Christian Gonzalez, who was a first round pick. Got to work with Kyrie Jackson this past year. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about him later, but I think that is an interesting point to consider because when you're building your staff, you want someone who can obviously do both. Someone who can recruit, develop those relationships, acquire the top end talent that you need to get your team to that next level. And then um and then you also have the coach that is more schematic oriented, someone who's really good with the X's and O's and teaching technique and this, that, and the third. But yeah, I don't know. I think he was a pretty solid developer of talent when you look at some of those guys that have come through Eugene recently. So um, there's still some guys obviously that he recruited on this roster. So I think Oregon fans should be excited to see what they can get out of him and out of these younger guys moving forward. Ruben, love the show and content you give us. Keep up the good work, Max. What's going on, Ruben? Glad to have you here on the show. I will be in Eugene later on this spring, and I just might have to make my way out to Ranchito out there in Springfield. So thanks for the comment, man. Hope you're having a great day. Yeah, Dylan with a question here, probably talking about Andrew's comment. Wasn't he our best developer? I think he's certainly up there, right? I think you have a lot of coaches on this staff that are really solid developers. You have to obviously look at Dan Lanning. Things start at the top there and the work he's been able to do with a lot of the best defensive prospects that came out of Georgia recently. And then now he's doing his thing with Jordan Birch. And you have to look at Tosh Lapoy and what he's done. Tony Tuioti is obviously someone who has been tremendous. Carlos Lachlan was great on the staff as well with the running backs. Junior Adams, he's a really, really good developer of talent at the wide receiver spot. And I feel like we're just at the tip of the iceberg with Junior Adams and what's to come with Oregon's wide receivers moving forward. Troy Franklin was a stud, but if he keeps recruiting at the clip that he is, I mean, maybe we could see multiple guys at Troy Franklin's level, which I kind of think we did to a degree last year, right? Tez Johnson went for over 1,000 yards and set the program record for most receptions in a season. So I think it's going to be big. And one of the cool parts, one of the exciting parts around this week's spring practice, Oregon got to welcome a couple of new faces. And I posted some of those pictures of some of those new guys over on my Instagram, also at Torres Sports. Give that one a follow from photographer JR Quint. And those new guys, you have Jabbar Muhammad, the Washington cornerback transfer, who joins the team in spring practice with the start of a new quarter. You also had Evan Stewart, the Texas A&M wide receiver transfer. He joined the squad. So really good to just keep bringing elite players, proven players at that, from the transfer portal to your team. And Hampton was asked, going back to the press conference and just some of our top news and notes from Oregon's fourth practice of spring ball, what about Jabbar Muhammad made you want him here? Why was he such a good player? Why did you guys kind of have to have him? And Hampton said, quote, he's really, really competitive. He's got great ball skills. He has elite transitions and change of direction. He's a competitor at the end of the day. Anyone we talked to about him, from his high school coaches to the coaches at Oklahoma State to some guys at Washington, they all talked about how much he competes and loves the game and goes about his process. This is his first week because of the new semester, but he's been a joy. He's done a lot of Zoom meetings and stuff over the course of the last few months. So with Jabbar Muhammad, I like what he had to say about just a lot of the traits that you want out of a top end corner, someone who can change direction and has a great speed. I think that's something that you look at for sure. And then just his competitive nature. I think he played with some really, really good swag is all I can really talk about, because he was always someone that had some energy. I think when I first heard about Jabbar Muhammad, I will have to say it was the Oregon State versus Washington game last year. It was like a monsoon and a windstorm, but that dude was just all over the field. And I remember kind of telling myself or saying to some of my buddies, like, wow, like that number one in the backfield is special. He's really doing his thing. And then what do you know? Now that the season ends, 4 or 5 months later, he finds himself in Eugene as the newest member of Oregon secondary. So I'm super excited to see what Jabbar Muhammad can do. I like that he also is in those Zoom meetings to kind of help bridge the gap a little bit, do what he can before getting out to Eugene and joining the team in practice. He's going to be wearing number 7 this year. So that was the number worn by Steve Stevens last year. Um, and I'm just excited to see what he can do in that cornerback room. I think Oregon's cornerbacks are going to take a good leap forward this year. I think that's certainly what you need going to the Big Ten if you're going to be going against a team like Ohio State and some of these other heavy hitters in the new conference. Taking a little sip of coffee here on a Friday morning. Thank you for being here. Glad you're here. Make sure to like and subscribe. Getting a couple of comments here in the live chat, so I'll get to those shortly. Another new guy that we got to hear about was Cam Alexander, the UTSA cornerback transfer, a guy who won MVP honors in the UTSA bowl game. I can't remember what it was, so apologies for that. But he is someone that committed to Oregon, and I think a lot of people saw, oh, UTSA, like, we have the Stein connection there. You have Antonio Parks, who was also on that staff over at UTSA, but not necessarily a guy who is known very widely across college football. So it only makes sense that we get to hear what Chris Hampton has to say about Cam Alexander. And he said, quote, he's really fast. That's the first thing. He's got really good ball skills. He's tough. I've seen him come up in these first 2 practices in pads and just thud people. I think he's going to be a tremendous asset to us. He's got really good change of direction. The other thing about him, he takes really good notes in meetings, really, really good notes. He asks good questions. He's been fun to coach. So the biggest thing I'm excited about with him is that speed, because I think Oregon found themselves lacking some of that speed and quickness in a couple of games last year. Most notably, of course, the Washington game, the second Washington game, I should say, in the Pac-12 title game. So when I think about speed and just having guys that are quick and maybe more athletically equipped to cover some of these top wideouts that they're going to be going against next year, Cam Alexander is certainly one that I think can help Oregon do just that. And then a note that I just thought about now, I had another thought about Jabbar Muhammad coming over. Look at what he was able to do. Look at the receiver room that he was going against last year. If you want a perfect example of iron sharpens iron, he was going against the Roma Dunzes and the Jalen Polks at Washington. And now he's going to be going against great wide receivers like Evan Stewart and Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant at Oregon. So there's plenty of opportunity for growth there if you're looking at what Jabbar Muhammad, what his what his kind of stealing looks like at Oregon. And what else did I have here that I wanted to talk about? The really good notes part. I think that's something that's kind of underrated. I think back to Bo Nix and how that was always lauded as something that was super special about him was his preparation. And I remember when I was interviewing Luke Moga, the true freshman quarterback for the Ducks, early enrollee quarterback for Oregon that they signed in 2024, I kind of got to pick his brain a little bit about Bo Nix and what it was like just getting to be around him, sit in on some of those quarterback meetings. I think Moga was there for the USC game, and he was saying that his preparation was just absolutely next level. So when you bring in guys that have all the tools for you physically, athletically, and then you also have someone that is doing a really good job in the classroom, whether that's hitting the books, obviously, or in this scenario, in the film room, getting the playbook, just trying to get coached up, be coachable. I think that just makes them that much more intriguing and that much more valuable to your team. The last update that we got from Coach Hampton was about Jaleel Florence, who we haven't heard or seen too much of in spring practice. He was asked if Jaleel Florence is going to be able to do anything this spring as he recovers from what I believe was a knee injury. And Hampton said, quote, we may get some stuff, we may get some out of him later on this spring. Later on in the spring, he's out there now doing some of the walkthrough stuff with us, but that's about it right now. I think his rehab is going pretty good from talking to Chief and talking to Jaleel. He's in a much better space than he was about a month ago. I expect that we may be able to get something out of him at the end of the spring. So I feel like that's a pretty good update on Jaleel Florence. I think that's good news because he was one of your top corners last year. And boy, you could have used him in that Pac-12 title game. So it sounds like things are on track for Jaleel Florence. I think that was one of the overarching questions that you probably had about the Ducks and more specifically their defense in the spring was just how available is Jaleel Florence going to be for you in the spring? And is he going to look like the same player? I think you would hope that he looks like the same player or that he's able to take it up a notch. And really, that starts with getting back on the field this spring. But it sounds like he's doing everything he can to do that. But the Ducks do have, I think, some really good players already at that position, right? You have Jabbar Muhammad, you have Cam Alexander, who comes over from the portal as well. Nico Reed is a guy I've been hearing about a little bit in the spring. And then some of the young guys like Rod Pleasant is doing a lot of track stuff in the spring, so he hasn't been out there a whole lot. And then you have Dakota Fields and Sione Laulea from the 2024 class. And there's just so many options that they have in that room. I'm going to be so excited to see what kind of growth they have heading into this year. Another guy we got to hear from on Thursday was linebacker Justin Jacobs. And he's coming back to Oregon in 2024 because he has something to prove. That's kind of one of the questions that's been floated out there for a lot of the guys that had the opportunity to go pro if they wanted to, but chose to come back for one more ride with the Ducks and Dan Lanning. And he was saying that he only played half the year and he still felt like he had something to prove. I remember when he transferred from Iowa, one of the stories that I was writing, it was from some NFL scout or something that was saying that he could be kind of one of the better linebackers in the upcoming draft. And because he only got to play half the year, we just didn't see that much of him. I want to say it was either the USC game or the Washington State game, maybe. I think Washington State game was his first one back, but he made as seamless a transition as you could possibly hope for. And Justin Jacobs was a serious player for the Ducks defense in 2023. And now he's going to benefit in 2024 from another year in the system, another year of coaching, playing alongside Jeffrey Bossa. I think that's one of the things that is going to be really fun to watch this year. I don't know if it's just me, if you guys feel this way. Every time I see a picture of Jeffrey Bossa, I feel like he's getting more shredded, more cut up, more muscle. Seeing those guys next to each other is going to be really special this year. And the linebacker depth that Oregon has, I think, is really, really good. And you see that you can have that starting duo, right? Anticipated duo of Jeffrey Bossa and Justin Jacobs. But then you also have a guy like Devin Jackson, who's one of the fastest guys on the team, even as a linebacker, playing in that 225, 230 range, I believe. And then Jerry Mixon, who was athletic as hell coming out of high school. And then you also have a trio of young guys in Braden Platt and Kamar Matudi, some All-Americans from the 2023 class that are already enrolled. And then Dylan Williams from Long Beach Poly is going to be joining that room in the near future as well. I think it looks like the summer, but that linebacker room has some serious potential. I think the other guy that is worth a mention is Connor Sowelli. He's been around. He came over from Arizona State between the 2022 season and the 2023 season. So that linebacker room looks really special. And one of the things that Bossa spoke about earlier this spring, I think we talked with him, the reporters talked with him on Tuesday, was how he's looking to really hone in on his pass rush this year. And I think back to that game, I almost said the Texas Tech game, but Dorless was the one that was applying the pressure, not him. So he said that he was trying to improve his pass rush. And then Justin was asked about him on Thursday and kind of what he liked about his play style. And he said his attention to detail, his ability to affect the quarterback, and his pass rush. So I think that there's some alignment there as far as where Bossa wants to get better and Jacobs is seeing it as well, and with his own two eyes. So that's definitely some reassuring stuff to hear about. Let's get to some of these other comments here. This one is from Sean Bryant. How do you feel about our run game this year? And do you think Dylan Gabriel will be more or less a dual threat that Bo was, being we have a more experienced depth at quarterback this year? This is a really interesting question. I think that Dylan Gabriel is a good runner for sure. He's a tough runner. I think he can run when he needs to. And I see some similarities between Bo and Dylan from when I'm just looking at this position, because neither guy was just snapping the ball and then taking off just because he wanted to or just because he could. I think you see two calculated runners. But even though Oregon does have more experienced depth at quarterback this year, obviously with a guy like Dante Moore coming in from UCLA, I still think that Will Stein's going to want to have his quarterback be smart and stay upright and not take unnecessary hits. So it'd be fun to see a lot of running this year from Dylan Gabriel, but I just don't think that we're going to see that aspect of the game utilized a whole lot unless they need to. If they're in a situation where just other things aren't working, and maybe you have to draw it up. But I think honestly, I'd probably think about the same for the running that we'll see from Dylan Gabriel compared to Bo Nix a year ago. And that's going to be something to monitor for sure, because you just want to keep those guys as healthy as possible. It's going to be a long, tough season in the Big Ten, probably more physical play than the Ducks saw last year in the Pac-12, but I think they're ready for that. So I think the run game's still going to be great. You got a great O-line coming back. You got some really talented backs, and then you have Dylan Gabriel, who's proven that he can run as well. Mile High Pride 94 says, I'm probably most excited for Jamari Caldwell. Jamari Caldwell comes over from Houston to fill a big need for the Ducks. The Ducks lost a lot of veteran defensive linemen from the last season, and they're asking him to do a lot. But the thing that's exciting about him is I think you see some Brandon Dorlus in him as far as being a guy on the interior that can also generate some rush. He's a little bit smaller. He's shorter than Dorlus. He's listed at 6'1", versus Dorlus was closer to the area of 290. 6'3". Gosh, I can't get this. I'm jumbled today. I apologize. Jamari Caldwell is like 6'1". Brandon Dorlus is 6'3", but Dorlus was 290 and Caldwell is in that neighborhood of 330. So having a guy that can generate some interior pass rush is super, super valuable. You got to think that the Oregon feels good about what pressure they're going to be able to get on the edges, on the outside, with guys like Jordan Birch and Mateo Uyunglele, and then Tatum Tuioti and Blake Purchase as well. So I'm excited for Jamari Caldwell as well. I wonder if Oregon's going to dip into the portal to get any more help there once the spring window opens. I think it would definitely make sense. But at the same time, you have a lot of really exciting young guys that are just looking for an opportunity. And I think that they've earned it. And the fact that they haven't taken more than one defensive lineman, I think, could speak volumes to how they feel about those young guys coming up. So another thing I'm going to talk about, probably the last topic for today, is one of the Oregon prospects in this upcoming draft that might be climbing draft boards that has some people excited. And that's Kyrie Jackson. Cornerback Kyrie Jackson. He was one of the really good players at the Senior Bowl in Mobile. And Jim Nagy, the executive director of the Senior Bowl, former NFL scout, put out this really detailed tweet about Kyrie Jackson. I'm going to try to read it and then just give some of my thoughts before we get out of here. Jim Nagy said, quote, looking back at notes from fall 2022, Senior Bowl scouting report, scouting on then Alabama cornerback Kyrie Jackson before he transferred to Oregon, trusted source on the coaching staff, this is probably at Alabama, told me, quote, Kyrie is the most talented guy in our DB room. And then this is what the Alabama DB room looked like 2 years ago. Brian Branch, Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Jordan Battle, Eli Ricks, DeMarco Helms, and Malachi Moore. Nagy continues in this tweet, strong case could be made that no DB in 2024 draft helped himself more this past year than Kyrie Jackson, who went from being essentially a special teams player at Bama to arguably the best corner in the Pac-12 for Dan Lanning. Jackson undeniably has top 50 talent, but for whatever reason, still seeing very little buzz on here about him. Corners who are 6'3" with 32 and 3/4 arms rarely move like this former East Mississippi Junior College product. Oh, and he also has elite 9.42 RAS score that includes an 11-1 broad jump. In a league that puts premium on length, it's hard to imagine Jackson getting out of day two. Adjust your cornerback rankings accordingly. So, more good things about Oregon cornerbacks. I think that this is a position where Oregon would love to continue putting guys out. Cornerback has been one of the most interesting positions in my eyes in recent years. Certainly, looking at some of the high level athletes that I get to spend time around, whether it's at the Under Armour Next Camp or the Adidas All American Bowl out in Texas. It's a hard position to play, and I think Nagy is probably spot on here when you look at a guy who is built physically like Kyrie Jackson is and has that high level athleticism. He's able to run and go against some of these top wideouts. He's proven that he's one of the better cornerbacks available in this draft, but I think he is kind of flying a little bit under the radar. So he's putting his best foot forward. And I think he ran around 4.5, which was pretty impressive for a guy who's as tall as he is as a DB. And I think that he could very well be the next in line to be the next successful Oregon defensive back. Follow in line with guys like Deommodore Lenoir, Javon Holland at corner. Javon Holland's obviously a safety, but Deommodore Lenoir is probably the best Oregon corner aside from Christian Gonzalez in the league right now. And Christian Gonzalez had a very short rookie season because of an injury. So I think that it'll be exciting to see what Kyrie Jackson can do in the NFL and where he'll maybe get drafted. So that's going to do it for us here on today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. Do me a quick favor. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at mtorres sports. Subscribe to my YouTube channel at Oregon Football Max Torres. Read me over on Ducks Digest. And you please share the show, share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. And until next time, probably Sunday or Monday, we'll see when I can get another show out. Thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.